go. All right, welcome everyone to the SIG Windows weekly meeting. Today, the first topic we have, let me share my screen real quick again. Is exciting. Privileged containers for Windows, and we have a proposal. Amber from the Windows kernel team is here to talk about it. Amber, I guess this is the document you want to talk about. So go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as Muzz mentioned, I am a PM on the Windows kernel team. I work a lot on Windows containers. So yeah, I think this is a highly anticipated feature from many in the community for Windows containers to light up privileged containers. This KEP that we have drafted here is on privileged containers for Windows and also lighting up host network mode, which is required for a lot of the different privileged networking scenarios. If people have gotten a chance to dive into this, I know it was added to the agenda sometime yesterday, so you probably didn't have too much time, but we can kind of walk through this briefly. We are planning on following up on this next week and the week after and trying to gather your guys' feedback as we kind of refine this KEP and take in scenarios that people think we should have prepped before we kind of launch into the further review process. So as a summary, I think many people in this community are probably familiar with all of the different scenarios that Windows currently requires workarounds for that are available on Linux via Linux privileged containers. Some of the main ones that have been highlighted to us are via kubeproxy, different storage and networking scenarios with CSI and CNI. And those workarounds have worked so far, but do have some drawbacks. So a lot of the motivation for us to try to do this KEP is to try to help with those scenarios and bring some amounts of experiential parity with Linux so that Kubernetes can kind of behave consistently between the two OSs. So we're trying to light up specifically working with privileged daemon sets and just working with privileged containers kind of one-off. Muzz, if you want to scroll down. So to kind of give us our goals, these are a little bit more high level than each specific scenario, but we're hoping to provide a method to build and launch these new container types to give access to host resources, which is kind of the essence of privileged containers. We're also trying to enable access to host network resources for privileged containers and privileged pods specifically. The other side of that, though, is that we are not aiming to provide these host network resources for non-privileged containers and pods, and we're not trying to light up a scenario where we can run privileged containers inside of Hyper-V containers, which has different applications, or run privileged containers kind of as like a privileged Hyper-V container. That would require a lot of different thinking and processes that we're not exactly looking at here. This might be relevant as different Kubernetes services start to adopt Hyper-V containers, or people are looking into using this as another kind of method to go about using Windows containers. But for now, you do need to run privileged containers kind of as they are as processes. So our proposal kind of dives into a couple of use cases, as I mentioned before. Privileged daemon sets, which are used to deploy a lot of the different scenarios that we highlighted previously with CSI proxy, HNS proxy, so on and so forth. And also node plugin containers that can do kind of other types of activities like device enumeration, monitoring, add-ons, and among others. Some notes and constraints and caveats is that, as we mentioned before, it's a non-goal that we want to enable. We don't want to, in this KEP, enable host network mode for non-privileged pods and containers, so it's only for privileged containers and privileged pods. And additionally, our privileged pods, just due to the way that we're implementing them, can only consist of privileged containers. So this is due to a restriction of the way that the way we're implementing this works with different IP ranges. And as a result, we can't have unprivileged Windows Server containers sharing in the same pod as a privileged containers. Some risks and mitigations as we're jumping into this. So we do anticipate several changes and several layers of different open source kind of components. And this is an area which might be kind of one of the comments here by James that we do need to dive into a little bit more in detail so we're aware of this. But if you have specifics that people in the community can call out and identify for us as well or concerns, this is another place for for them to be mentioned. The 3 layers that we've really identified might need changes are in containerd, cry, kubelet. And there are some workarounds that we have proposed via annotations and other things, but those also do require some work. So this area is something that we would like people, if they have thoughts, to please kind of chime in, but we are going to continue working on. Additionally, as kind of mentioned with kubelet, part of the changes are going to be with PSPs. We've been doing some investigation kind of on the Windows side on the different kind of PSPs and how they apply to Windows containers, and specifically for the privileged scenarios. So we've only really identified a couple of PSPs that are really essential for our privileged scenario case. One of them is, of course, the privilege flag, and another one is kind of host networking and how that interacts with different host networking scenarios for privileged containers. Additionally, there's GMSA kind of all the way at the bottom of this table. But there's a lot of reasoning in the scenario kind of column about why we think these may or may not be applicable to privileged containers, at least in this iteration of what we're trying to implement here. If there are thoughts on why this may or may not be, we should think more deeply about some of these, those are also very open to feedback. So to dive into a little bit of design details, this implementation, we are going to kind of diverge from what we've done traditionally with Windows containers and using the server silo. We are instead using privileged job objects to implement privileged containers. This is because the silo, despite different ways for us to kind of work with it, or some flexibilities it does offer and benefits it does offer in isolation, for privileged containers, we do need to have greater access to the host and be able to work with different resources on the host. So we've chosen to work with the job objects. There's a lot of kind of details on how this works if you scroll down as well. So the different implications for networking, for resource limits. You would think of a lot of the constraints that exist with job objects in Windows in general, and how that kind of impacts the way this privileged container will work. A lot of those will kind of translate over into this privileged container implementation. So resource limits, for example, is something that is useful for containers, especially in production, and that is something that is available to us via the job object implementation. So some things that are still kind of being thought through with this specifically, and we would really, really love some feedback on, is the different requirements that we might have around container images and the different experiences that may or may not be, usable in terms of container image building and definition, because these will differ significantly from the way that we have them implemented for things like the server silo-based containers. Container images specifically, there are some questions about what type of base images different people would want to use with these privileged containers. There are some investigations that we're doing in terms of, given the job object, what is the minimum type of base image we might be able to use, and whether or not it warrants creating a new image for it. Would that be desirable to customers? What other experiences people might hope for? We understand that privileged containers in Linux often do building from scratch, and that is something that we're kind of looking at. But of course, there's some requirements in terms of the job object needing certain hierarchy and so on and so forth. So we have identified that something can be done slimmer, but we're trying to understand the different use cases that people imagine building their containers with, and ideas there. So kind of rolling into the test plan and how we anticipate working with this. In alpha and beta, we're trying to do a preliminary analysis and testing of no Kubernetes scenarios in alpha. We're working specifically with James on a lot of this and identifying these scenarios. In beta, we're hoping to kind of broaden that to work with the test grids. And of course, as you can see here, we're kind of actively recording that here. It's pretty empty, but if people have ideas, do please add to this list as well. So diving into graduation criteria. So one thing to note about the job object implementation is that it doesn't necessarily have dependencies on specific versions of our OS. But we are trying to look at what is the most reasonable OS for us to start kind of support from. In terms of what versions of Kubernetes we might be targeting for, So our most aggressive timeline is that we might try to get this, launched into alpha in 120. But depending on kind of the development and internal work that we have on our side with this implementation, it might be 121. And then beta would hopefully be the version right after that initial alpha release. And still kind of having support starting at 1809 in the LTSC. The GA, I think, is kind of dependent on a lot of feedback that we're anticipating coming from the community kind of across this time. But, we'll continue refining that criteria as we go forward. And again, as I've said multiple times now, probably if there's any feedback, please do add it here. The upgrade and downgrade strategy. So for Windows, the benefit of the job objects is that they do not require any backports for OS components. So it's just a matter of what we can broaden our testing to kind of support and what is applicable to the different scenarios for people using it in the community. And then separately for Kubernetes and Containerd, we have different versions that we've highlighted above in our alpha and beta graduation criteria. But whether or not those need to be backported for any reasons is something that we would like to have some feedback on. And of course, some of the open questions that I highlighted in the design area are kind of echoed here again in open questions. Feel free to add to this list if you want to call out things for us to continue to review. But these are things that we're continuing to think about as we further refine a lot of these areas. So 15 minutes later, any questions? I don't want to take up all the time. We also we will be looking at this again in a future meeting. So no rush if you want to take more time to review as well.
Awesome, Amber. This is super exciting. Any questions, concerns, top of mind? The link of the document is shared here, and you can definitely give feedback to us.
Also to chime in kind of on the tail end, as I mentioned before, our aggressive timeline is to try to aim for 120. So thinking about how we want to get feedback in the timeline for it, we're hoping to kind of do a couple of revs of this in the coming weeks. So we do want to do a review of this again next week to have some active discussion around it. But do please feel free to add actively throughout the next couple of weeks different thoughts that come up, or if you're discussing with different folks as well. And we'll kind of try to do some fast iteration on it in a couple of weeks and see if we can get this moving faster. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Amber. So 2 weeks. 2 weeks for any feedback. Again, this is, if we have more feedback, we can push it back, Amber, right? This is just we try to get it in 2 weeks as much as we can. And then we'll try to make it an official cap with the enhancement proposal and, go to, go to the next step, which is also another interesting thing that we want to ask the community on how we want to approach once we get there. Okay. Okay, so the next topic we have is add NFS support for Windows. I don't know who added this. I think I forgot the name. Are they on the call? Okay.
Yeah, it's me, Jing.
Hey, Jing.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So I am trying to add NFS support for Windows. There are some changes currently I put in the month util. That is the first PR I list in the table.
Okay.
And so currently I use net use command to make the connection to the NFS share, and then create symlink, and then I think container can use that symlink to access the NFS share, and it's working. But I just want to see whether there's some expert here related to the NFS support for Windows to kind of give me some feedback, whether there are some potential issues. Currently, we are discussing how to do the, let's say, the cleanup. And NFS right now, the genetic driver is not, we call it device mountable. So it's in Kubernetes, we have mount device and mount. So right now I put the command in the mount function, but instead we probably need to put it in the mount device interface, and we need to enable NFS driver to become a driver, like implement the mount device interface. Basically, there are some discussion we are trying to see if we don't clean the NFS connection correctly, what's the potential issue. And also, I see there's someone somewhere mentioned Windows only support 20 network connection, but when I test it, I can like easily support hundreds of NFS network connection. I don't know what's that information come from. If there's someone here have more details about the NFS support, I would like to hear some feedback. Yeah.
Jing, can you repeat the last question? Sorry, what were you saying? Windows 24.
So we're trying to see if, for example, if the network connection cannot be cleaned up correctly, what's the problem? And so I did a search online. I found there's some document mention Windows only support up to 20 network connection.
Is David on the call?
But when I tested, I test like I can set up hundreds of connections.
It could be that that's a limitation based on what Windows Server SKU you're using, or Windows SKU. But yeah, if David's on the call, he might have more info.
I haven't heard of this. Where's this documented?
Yeah, Jing, can you share the document?
Sure, let me find.
Is it like a NFS documentation or?
No, it's just some related to network connection document. For example, here, it's not a formal document, it's just someone asked, and let me, I could not quickly find the one I found yesterday, but definitely somewhere mentioned the 20 network connection limits.
Okay, I can put the link here. I don't know if David, you want to follow up on this. I haven't heard of anything like that, 20 connection. That should not be the case. I don't know where that is coming from.
This is also something storage related, this thread.
I see.
So I'm not sure. I haven't heard of this. What kind of connection is this? TCP connections or?
So for NFS, it's considered TCP connection, right?
Can support more than 20 connections. Like containers can support more than 20 concurrent TCP connections.
Is that a limitation in the NFS stack, or is that a limitation in the TCP IP stack?
It shouldn't be a limitation in TCP IP stack.
Right, I think it's, I mean, I don't know of any TCP IP stack limitations, so I'm guessing it might be more of an NFS limitation.
But Jing, you said you tested it and it does support more, right? Yeah, so we can probably
Right.
just ignore it.
Okay. Okay.
The other thing is that there's no Windows version mentioned here. Some of the articles seem to be Windows 7 or maybe older. Like this was
Okay.
created on July 18, 2017. Maybe things have changed since then.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Mostly like want to, because this is first time we trying to enable NFS on Windows, so I just want to like get some feedback if someone know some issues about NFS support on Windows, so we can like anticipate those issues.
Okay, is there anyone here with NF experience, or we can do a follow-up on this?
Well, I see that Andy is reviewing the PRs, and he's
Yeah.
probably our foremost expert in that area.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Sounds good. Cool. Thanks, Jing. The next one we have is add end-to-end test. I think last time we have this. I don't know if they weren't here last time. I forgot the name again. Sorry, I'm really bad
Also
with
I'm
the name.
hier, I'm Volker, Tomakos in GitHub. Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, also the status from our side is that my colleague implemented a first version of the end-to-end test, but as it compiles, but it's a dry version, also so we couldn't run the end-to-end test yet. And Adelina already was of a great help. We probably would need additional help for getting the end-to-end tests running itself. I think this is the current status.
Hey, I can help
Hi.
you with that. Hi. I can help you with that, with setting up a cluster and whatever other info you need on running the tests. I'll take a look at it on my own and run it on something that I already have set up. I think I can find the time this week. Last week was really busy with some other work.
No problem, no problem. Yeah, sounds excellent. And one idea would be how soon it would be possible to integrate it in this automated test run infrastructure, which you can access via GitHub, or is this a possibility? Or
I mean, there are two ways to run it. Once the PR merges, it will the test will be picked up and ran in the jobs that we already have set up. Of course, if there are some, and I assume there are some necessary setting steps for some steps to set up the target cluster, then probably changes to the existing jobs will need to be made. The other way we run tests is that we have a job that can be triggered on each PR.
okay. As a meaning, we would need to create a PR for this, right?
So you create a PR, and then there's a command that the bot picks up, and it will do the test. But again, if there is some necessary setup to be done on the cluster, then obviously those clusters are not set up in that way. So, but I'll talk there on the issue once I get a chance to look at it more in depth.
Okay, thank you, Adelina. Yeah, let us know, Thomas, if if you're not making progress, like we can definitely. I think Adelina will be able to help you there.
Sounds excellent.
Yeah, cool. The last one from Arvind and Ravi. Are you guys there? Want to talk about this?
Yeah, I'm here. So yeah, we did discuss this. I think must have been a couple of weeks ago, and this was about basically ignoring some of these labels that are very Linux specific on Windows pods at the kubelet level. So we did get an LGTM from Deep, and so we're wondering what needs to be done for approval here. There are some open conversations which I think have been resolved. So just wondering if we need to do something more, or basically what the next steps are.
I see.
Yeah, so the next step
So-
is to get, oh, go ahead, Deep. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying the open question is the other pointer to the other PR that I think Wawa, I don't know what his real name is, was working on. I think that could be kind of worked on a separate PR, and we should have. So, comment.
I see. So Deep, you're saying that
PR
that's
should-
sort of like a separate issue that should be resolved
Exactly.
on that PR. Okay. Yeah, that's what even we thought.
Correct.
We're not sure if that's
Yeah.
the general consensus.
I think
So the next step would be getting the approval from SIG.
Okay.
we may want
James, go
to
ahead.
look
Jim.
at how, if any of these changes are affected by the privileged containers KEP as well, or if they might be able to go in as they are now, but just make sure that there's nothing that would be reconsidered if we were to go down the route with privileged containers.
So James, are you gonna look at it from that point of view?
Yeah, I can look at it again.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, James. Let us know if you want any changes based on that.
All right.
Yeah,
Cool.
reaching out to SIG is kind of the next step too. So.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay, I guess we're out of time. Thank you, everyone. Please, as we said, please review the CAP for privileged containers. That's a big change, and it will affect a lot of things, as we can already see it happening. And thank you for attending. We'll talk to you next week. Michael will be back. I have scheduled a bi-weekly backlog review meeting. I encourage everyone to join it. You should have an invite. I will post the link here as well, right here in the meeting notes for that. And I'll create a separate doc for that. It will be starting this Thursday. So with that, thank you, everyone.
Thanks.